There's a particular kind of sentence that makes a viewer stop scrolling. It begins with an elder, it adds a warning, then it points toward a dark opening in the Grand Canyon and suggests that something is being withheld. What Navajo elders refuse to say about the hairy ones beneath the Grand Canyon. It sounds as though the silence itself is evidence. If an elder would not speak, perhaps the story is too dangerous to tell. If the canyon has caves, perhaps the caves contain the proof. If the claim uses the name Navajo, perhaps it carries the weight of an ancient tradition. But none of those steps follows automatically. For this investigation, the first question is not what might be under the canyon. It is much simpler. Where is the public Diné source for this claim? Who is the named elder? When was the statement recorded? What language was it originally spoken in? Which community confirmed that the story could be shared publicly? No public source reviewed for this film establishes that Navajo elders described hair-covered beings living beneath the Grand Canyon. No public source establishes that elders refused to explain such beings, and no public record turns silence into proof. That does not make the Grand Canyon less extraordinary. It makes the real story easier to see. Grand Canyon is a cultural landscape connected to 11 traditionally associated tribes, including the Diné Navajo Nation. The National Park Service describes it as a sacred place for many indigenous peoples of the Southwest. Some associated tribes recount public creation, emergence, or origin histories connected to the canyon. Those traditions are not one shared script. They are not clues to be pulled apart and reassigned until they fit a modern monster story. The idea of the hairy ones has power because it combines three things that are real with a fourth thing that is not supported. The canyon has caves. The canyon has ancient archaeology. The canyon has living indigenous traditions. Those facts are real. The unsupported fourth step is the claim that they point to a hidden community of hair-covered beings known to Navajo elders. The difference matters because the Grand Canyon has a long history of attracting stories that borrow credibility from indigenous people while ignoring the people themselves. One of the best-known examples began in 1909, when the Arizona Gazette published an account of an explorer named G.E. Kincaid, who supposedly found an underground citadel in the canyon filled with strange artifacts and Egyptian-looking objects. The story has been repeated for more than a century as if it were a suppressed Smithsonian discovery. The Smithsonian's own myth review says otherwise. It identifies the story as a hoax. That does not mean the newspaper never existed. It means the existence of a newspaper article is not evidence that the underground city existed. This is the first lesson the hairy ones claim asks us to forget. A dramatic story can be real as a publication and false as history at the same time. The Kincaid tale is especially useful because it shows how a canyon can become a screen for other people's fantasies. The original story offered chambers, mummies, strange inscriptions, and a connection to Egypt. Later versions added more details. Over time, the canyon became less a real place with many indigenous communities and more a container for whatever mystery a new teller wanted to add. The phrase, "Navajo elders refused to say," works in the same way. It protects the claim from examination. If nobody can name the source can never be checked. If the silence is treated as proof, there is no need for a date, a recording, a translation, or a community context. But public oral tradition does not work like an empty space that anyone can fill. It has speakers, it has relationships, it has rules about what can be shared. A public storyteller may share one part of a tradition and not another. That boundary does not prove an outside theory. It means the boundary should be respected. At Grand Canyon, the Park Service's First Voices program does not ask Diné artists and storytellers to confirm strangers' mysteries. It presents people speaking about their own crafts, languages, experiences, and public traditions. Sunny Dooley, a Diné storyteller featured by the park, is described as sharing Hain, or blessing way stories passed through her family. The point is not that every teaching becomes public. The point is that living communities have the right to decide how public knowledge is carried. So if the hairy one's story is not supported by a public Diné source, what is actually beneath the Grand Canyon? The answer is not empty. It includes real caves, real archaeology, real fossils, and real objects placed there by people thousands of years ago. The next question is what those objects mean, and why the truth is far more interesting than a creature in the dark. The Grand Canyon has caves. Some are large enough to hold a person. Some are narrow cracks in limestone, some preserve material because cool, dry conditions slow decay. Most are not open to casual exploration, and the National Park Service closes caves and mine shafts to protect fragile formations, wildlife, fossils, and archaeological resources. That fact alone can make a rumour feel stronger. A closed cave sounds like a secret, but a closure is usually the opposite of a secret. It is a public decision to protect something that can be damaged, removed, or misunderstood. The real archaeology of Grand Canyon caves is not a story about hidden humanoids. It is a story about people and animals leaving traces in difficult places over immense spans of time. The Park Service has documented more than 4,000 archaeological resources in the park. Its archaeological record includes sites connected to Paleo-Indian, Archaic, Basket Maker, Ancestral Puebloan, Pai, Southern Paiute, Zuni, Hopi, Navajo, and other historical groups. The number should not be treated as a treasure map. It is evidence of long human use of a landscape that has never been empty. Among the most striking objects found in remote Grand Canyon caves are split twig figurines. These small forms were made from bent and tied twigs. Many resemble deer or bighorn sheep. Some were found beneath carefully placed rock cairns. They date roughly 2,000 to 4,000 years ago. Their exact purpose is still debated, although the Park Service says recent research suggests they may have been totems associated with late archaic hunting and gathering culture. That is a genuine mystery. It has a real object, a real context, and a real limit to the evidence. Notice what it does not require. It does not require us to claim that an animal-shaped figurine proves a hidden animal-human species. It does not require us to assign the object to a modern community without evidence. It does not require an elder's unnamed silence to complete the story. The same caution applies to fossils. Grand Canyon's rock layers preserve an enormous record of ancient life. The canyon is older than the oldest known dinosaurs, so it is not a place to find dinosaur bones. But caves have preserved more recent material, including sloth bones, dung, and hair dating back thousands of years, along with condor remains and other evidence of changing environments. Hair in a cave is real. A hair-covered creature living beneath the canyon is a different claim entirely. That distinction may seem obvious when stated plainly. It becomes less obvious when a video cuts from an old black and white photograph to a dark cave entrance, adds a creature-shaped shadow, and tells viewers that someone refused to explain it. The image supplies an emotion before the evidence has supplied a fact. The Park Service's public archaeological materials offer a different visual language. They show tools, pottery, rock shelters, fieldwork, maps, and objects whose meaning must be approached carefully. Archaeology does not become less compelling when it admits uncertainty. It becomes more useful. Take the split twig figurines. A small tied bundle of wood can look insignificant until you understand where it was found and how old it is. Then it becomes a connection to a hunting and gathering world that existed long before the current national park. A person placed it deliberately in a cave. The object survived. Its full meaning did not. That is not a failure. It is a real historical problem, and it invites careful research rather than fantasy. The same is true of rock writings, springs, trails, and gathering areas throughout the canyon. They may be archaeological evidence. They may also be part of an ongoing cultural landscape. The Park Service works with associated tribes to protect such places, because a photograph or an artifact cannot tell the whole story by itself. This is where the claim about Navajo elders becomes especially unfair. It takes public respect for limits and turns it into proof of a secret. If a community does not share a teaching with the public, that does not authorize outsiders to invent the teaching for them. If a place is protected, that does not mean it contains the answer to a rumor. And if a cave is dark, that does not mean the darkness contains a creature. There is a better question waiting inside the evidence. Why are people so ready to turn real archaeological uncertainty into an underground legend? Part of the answer lies in the Kincaid story, part lies in the visual power of caves, and part lies in a habit of treating indigenous traditions as if they exist to confirm whatever mystery outsiders already want to believe. To see how that habit works, we have to return to the people whose names are placed on these stories, and to the difference between public tradition, protected knowledge, and a claim invented from silence. The phrase Navajo elders can sound respectful. In a misleading story, it often does the opposite. It removes names, communities, language, and context, then uses the word elders as a shield against questions. Who were they? No name is given. Where did they speak? No community is identified. When was the account recorded? No date appears. What exactly did they say? The claim depends on what they supposedly refused to say. This is not how public history is built. It is how an unverifiable story protects itself. The Diné are not a symbol for mystery. They are a living people with communities, artists, families, language, political institutions, and ways of deciding what knowledge is appropriate to share. The Park Service's public programs at Grand Canyon make this visible. Diné artists, storytellers, and youth groups participate in a cultural setting where they speak about public work and public traditions on their own terms. That is very different from a narrator saying, "They would not tell us the truth." Some knowledge in any community is private, ceremonial, family-held, or tied to a particular place. That is normal. It does not create a blank check for outsiders to write a creature story into the silence. In fact, the more a claim relies on protected knowledge that cannot be checked, the more careful a documentary should become. The Grand Canyon makes this especially important because it is connected to many nations. The Park Service says that some associated tribes recount public creation, emergence, or origin histories that take place within the canyon. It also says the canyon is sacred and that its archaeological sites, springs, gathering areas, traditions and stories are part of a living cultural landscape. The key word is some. The public statement does not say every tribe tells the same story. It does not give one group permission to speak for another, and it does not say that any of those histories describe hair-covered beings beneath the canyon. This is where stories are often blended until they become unrecognizable. A public Hopi tradition may be mentioned beside a Diné place name. A 19th century newspaper hoax may be placed beside an archaeological cave. A modern illustration may add a dark figure in the background. By the time the audience hears the final line, the parts feel connected even though no source ever connected them. That is not investigation. It is collage. The responsible alternative is not to avoid every difficult subject. It is to label each part honestly. A newspaper hoax is a newspaper hoax. A real cave object is a real cave object. A public oral tradition is a public oral tradition. A protected teaching is not ours to reconstruct. A modern image is an illustration, not evidence. Once those categories are separated, the Grand Canyon becomes more complex, not less. The canyon has deep geological time, ancient archaeological traces, many historical communities and continuing cultural connections. Its caves can preserve fragile material for thousands of years. Its walls hold rock writings whose meanings are not exhausted by a camera. Its trails carry the memory of people who lived, worked, travelled and cared for the region, long before it was a national park. None of that needs the hairy ones. The Kincaid hoax is useful again here. It did not become popular because it was well documented. It became popular because it made the canyon feel like a locked room in a mystery novel. The story offered an explorer, a forbidden entrance, lost artifacts, and an institution supposedly hiding the truth. Later retellings could add almost anything, because the original had already moved the audience away from ordinary evidence. The claim about silent Navajo elders follows the same pattern. It gives the story a human authority, while making that authority impossible to verify. It turns respect for cultural boundaries into a marketing device, and it encourages viewers to mistake a refusal to invent for a refusal to speak. But public Diné voices are not absent from the Grand Canyon. They are visible in the work of artists and storytellers, in the communities near the Eastern Rim, in the Park Service's First Voices program, and in ongoing cultural connections to the landscape. The question is whether a documentary will listen to those public voices or use an invented silence instead. The final evidence brings the story back to the canyon itself. The most powerful answer is not hidden in a cave. It is in the way real places demand better questions from us. The Grand Canyon has room for wonder. It does not need false certainty. The public record supports a clear answer. The canyon is a sacred and culturally connected landscape for many indigenous nations, including the Diné Navajo Nation. Public traditions, art, language, and historical connections remain part of the region. Real archaeological materials have been found in caves and rock shelters. Real fossils, including ancient hair, have been preserved in cave environments. And a real newspaper once printed a spectacular story about a hidden underground city. But the public record does not support the claim that Navajo elders refused to describe hair-covered beings living beneath the canyon. That is not a small correction. It changes the whole story. Instead of asking why elders would hide a creature, we can ask why a modern claim needs unnamed elders in the first place. Instead of treating a closed cave as proof, we can ask what protection means for fossils, wildlife, archaeological sites, and sacred places. Instead of looking at a split-twig figurine and imagining a monster, we can ask what a carefully made animal form tells us about people who lived in this landscape thousands of years ago. Those questions do not shrink the canyon, they return its scale. The canyon is full of things that are not completely known. Archaeologists do not know the exact purpose of every object. Geologists continue to refine the history of its formation. Communities hold public and non-public relationships to places that cannot be reduced to visitor information. Uncertainty is real, but uncertainty is not evidence for the first extraordinary story someone chooses to attach to it. This is the line a responsible documentary has to hold. Say what the source establishes. Say what it does not establish. Leave room for the fact that not every story is public. Do not turn that room into a stage for invented beings. At the rim, the canyon can look empty because the distance is so large, yet its archaeological record shows long human use. Its public tribal programs show continuing cultural connection. Its caves hold evidence of animals, people, climate, and time. Its protected places remind us that curiosity does not always mean access. The phrase, "hairy ones beneath Grand Canyon," tries to convert all of that into one image, a creature in the dark. It is memorable. It is also unsupported. The more meaningful image is quieter. It is a small twig figurine placed under a rock cairn thousands of years ago. It is a public storyteller carrying language forward. It is a closed cave protected because some things cannot survive careless attention. It is a canyon shared by many nations, each with histories that do not need to be blended into one myth to matter. There is another reason to be precise. False stories can change how people behave. A viewer who believes every inaccessible cave hides, a forbidden discovery may ignore closures, enter fragile places, remove objects, or treat protected ground as a puzzle built for entertainment. The Park Service closes caves for concrete reasons. Vulnerable formations, wildlife, fossils, and cultural resources can be damaged quickly and restored slowly if at all. Protection is not a clue, it is a responsibility. The same is true of images. A black and white photograph with scratches can make a modern reconstruction feel ancient. A blurred shape in an alcove can look like proof if the narration has already supplied the fear. That is why this documentary labels reconstructions as illustrations and uses real records for factual claims. A persuasive image is not the same thing as a reliable source. If a future public Diné source identifies a specific teaching that can be shared, the responsible response would be to name the source, its context, and its limits. Until then, the claim should remain what it is, an unsupported phrase repeated because it makes a compelling thumbnail. The canyon deserves better than that, and the people whose names are attached to the phrase deserve better too. The claim in the title was never a Navajo teaching, at least not in the public sources available for this investigation. The real Diné connection to the canyon does not become weaker because we refuse the full story, it becomes clearer. If this changed the way you see the Grand Canyon, consider subscribing to Navajo Echoes, and if there is a public record, landscape, or historical claim you would like examined with the same care, leave it in the comments.